Right, so Nexus Compute is Hexagon's online on-demand computing cloud solution. And what we will be doing today is purely just to look at what challenges Nexus Compute needs to solve, and then I'll demonstrate that, and then we can talk about any questions you may have, and then how to set up a trial with which you can run real and large jobs. The trial gives you access to 1,000 credits, and I will then briefly explain what that means in monetary terms and solving time. Nexus is actually a larger portfolio of products that Hexagon is offering on the cloud, with Nexus Compute being one of them. And you're more than welcome to look into the others that are available on the platform. But today we're only going to look at Nexus Compute. Now, I will demonstrate this in person as well. But just to make sure that I don't forget a step or go too fast, I've just prepared a few slides to illustrate from screenshots. So the first step is literally to register or log in to nexus.hexagon.com. And once you've registered and you log in, you'll get to this landing page. And there's actually 3 locations where you can access Nexus Compute from. The tab on the left-hand side is the My Projects tab, so you can literally go directly to your projects. If you have it listed as a product, or in this case a trial, it will be on the top right-hand side, or down the list of Nexus apps, you'll find Nexus Compute. Now, once you use Nexus Compute, it's essentially these 6 steps. Now, I actually thought I will start by showing a demonstration, and as I started capturing all the steps, I realized that it may actually come over as very intimidating. So I've tried to just simplify it into these 6 steps. So what it entails is, first you will start by creating a project. And then in the project, you will create a document. Now, I think they've used the term document incorrectly. It should rather be a folder. I think that makes more sense in the way they use it. So it's not an actual text or document. It's more like a folder. And then once you've created that, you upload your input files. So if you're running a Nastran job, you will upload your PDF file. If you're running Cradle, you will upload the GPH and the other file. I have a slide of it, as well as for Dytran, where you have the DAT file, and what was the other file that goes with the DAT file?
PDF file.
PDF file. So you'll upload those, and you can upload multiple files at once as well. So in your project, you can have various documents or folders, and then in each of those, you can have multiple input files. So as mentioned, some solvers require separate or more than one input file, or you can have multiple sets of input files. So it's up to you how you organize yourself and how you will manage all the data in these folders. And I'll show you some examples of projects that we've already done, and we will also create one from scratch. The next step is then, of those input files, you select a set. So in other words, either one BDF file or your data and BDF file, etc. And then you create a job. And once you've created the job, you will set up the job. Now, setups purely means what computer hardware do you select, because that dictates how long the job will run, as well as how much it will cost. And then once you've submitted it, it's coffee time, because then you can monitor the job and then eventually download your results from the cloud. So that's in essence a high-level view of what the process means. So practically, how it looks like is you'll get to your landing page after you've selected projects. And here you can now either select an existing project or a new project. The next step is to create this document, or I would rather call it a folder. And once you've created that, you now need your input files. So if it's a Cradle file that you're running, you need the GPH file and the SPH file that it creates. If it was a Nastran file, it was a BDF, and if it was a Ditran job, it was a DAT and a BDF file. So it's important to know where these files are saved and how to obtain them and which ones are required for your job. An additional file that we also have an example of is, for instance, a fan file that Gerrit used in one of the jobs where he had the fan spec, and that's an extra CSV file that was also required to submit as part of the job. So you literally select your package of input files and then you submit them. So it's purely a matter of drag and drop or upload the files. And then after you've selected, as I mentioned, in this folder or doc, you can have multiple input files or multiple jobs input files, and you then simply select which ones to create the job for. And once you've created the job, it's a matter of selecting the solver. It tries to identify the input file and select the appropriate software for you. Otherwise, you just select it manually. You can also select the version, but I'll demonstrate this as well. And then for the type of solver that you have selected, there are different hardware setups already arranged that you can select from. And we will go through a few of those examples. And as you select the hardware, it updates to show you how many credits per hour this will cost. Now, briefly, one credit costs essentially €1. So for the entry package is 2,000 credits that you can buy. And then that is effectively available in your bank with Nexus. And here you can see how many credits your job will run. Now, if you're weary that the job will run forever, or for some reason, have an excessively long runtime, you can cap the runtime according to your budget or according to what you expect from the analysis. For instance, if it's a nonlinear analysis or a CFD analysis and you're not 100% sure if it will converge to an answer within a reasonable time, but you expect it to solve in much less than an hour, you can cap the maximum time so that it doesn't eat up all your credits while you're away on holiday. And then you submit the job. And as you've submitted the job, as I said, it's coffee time. You can monitor the job, and then once it's finished, you merely view the results that are created, and you can select the files to download. This is just a screenshot. I'll demonstrate this as well with an example that we have where for one specific project, there were multiple jobs. And as you can see, 2 of the jobs were done. One was terminated by the user, and the other one at the time when I took the screenshot was still running. So this is how you can monitor how your projects are progressing on the server. All right, so just briefly, what challenges does Nexus solve? So the first thing is your limitations in terms of hardware that you have at the office, and it's difficult to predict the demands. With Nexus Compute, you literally have access to virtually unlimited resources, and you only use it when you use it, and it's always available. And at the back end, obviously, you'll have access to the latest hardware that the system makes available to you. For the computer-aided engineering manager, that means there's access for multiple users to run their analyses, and you can deliver on time. The main value that you get using the Nexus Compute is twofold. The first is that you don't use your own software licenses to run those jobs. So in other words, the credits that you pay per hour includes the software, which means you can limit your software on your in your office to what you need to set up these jobs, and then submit your runs to run on the cloud, and you don't consume your licenses at the office. The other aspect is now you have no limitation on how many jobs you can run, because normally you have a number of tokens, which makes a number of jobs simultaneously possible, and you have to queue them, or you have, one solver computer, and again, you can't run too many jobs maybe in parallel on that machine. With Nexus Compute, you can literally submit as many jobs as you want on different hardware setups, etc., without any of those limitations. So there's no limitation on licenses, and there's no limitation on hardware. Right, the other challenges, of course, that this solves is all the data handling that goes with it, because currently you don't pay for the data storage on Nexus. Now this I suspect it will soon change. If you just look at the amount of data that we've created in a few weeks with a few hundred credits to our disposal, you literally are storing gigabytes of data on their service. At the moment, as I said, there's no charge for it. And the other benefit is that all the data is in that structure that you've chosen, either in your project or in the various documents that you've created. And then lastly, the data becomes available to anybody who needs it in your organization. So by default, only you see the projects that you created, but you can share them with anybody else that needs access to your result files, for instance. So this makes the whole solution very scalable in terms of software and hardware. Right, so these are the typical challenges that customers have, and Nexus makes it accessible to you. So the entry price is $2,000 or euros. I think this was supposed to be euros. And it gives you 2,000 credits. The evaluation term that you get is 1 month of access to 1,000 credits. And the idea with that is for you to get a feel for how long does your typical jobs run. So you can run any jobs and as many as you like that until it consumed your tokens, your credits. It gives you the opportunity to benchmark jobs that you've run at the office to on the cloud, and it gives you a feel for how well some of your solutions go. We will most likely in the future have a session with Gerrit where we discuss what types of analyses are well scaled on multiple CPUs, which ones aren't, or which parts of what types of analyses scale well and which ones don't. But don't give him too much time, because he'll keep you busy for a very long time. And it becomes quite complicated. Right, so that's about it from the slides that I want to show. Let's dive into the interface. So the first step, as I said, is to register. Now, this is probably the most difficult part of the whole process, is just to go through the registration process. Once you've registered, you'll have the option to register or to link to an existing customer or an existing account. So anyone can currently register on Nexus, but once you want to use Nexus Compute, you need to be linked to an existing customer account, and then according to the customer account, you will have access to as many tokens or credits as the customer has signed up for. So once you get the admin underway, it's now purely a matter of logging into the system, and that gives you access to the landing page of Nexus. At this point, before we go into Nexus Compute, I could maybe just highlight, this is where you have access to the e-learning material as well as all the documents of all the products online as well as the community. All right, now as I've shown in that one slide, we can either go directly to my projects, to my products, my trials, or in the Nexus apps to Nexus Compute. So it doesn't matter which ones you select. And now we enter the Nexus Compute environment. So I'm going to launch. And once I've launched, I get to this landing page where I have access to the latest documents, or as I rather call them, folders, or the latest projects that I've worked on. Or you can literally just sort them by date or by name, whichever is more useful for you. Now, if you do have an existing project, it will look like this. So here we see that there is this project with two, what we call it, documents in there. And if we look at this document or folder, we see that there were a number of jobs. So as I've shown before, two jobs that were completed, one that was terminated, and the one that was still busy when I took the screenshot is now done. Here we can see the number of input files, what the file names were, etc. And if we simply go to the files, we see all those different input files. Now it's up to you to pick the appropriate files that you want to create a new job from. But for now, we're just going to look at what is already available for each of these. So if we go into the first one over here, we can see a log of the monitor file that was available. We can see what the settings was for the specific job. So we can see on which hardware it ran, what the command was, and which input files were used. And then lastly, we see all the result files as well, their names, their extensions, and the size of each of these. Right, so that was for an existing job. But let's demonstrate a new job. So we can create a new job over here. Demo 2. And once that is created, I can now create the document or folder. Batch 1. You can even select others. Now it's purely as simple as adding the input files that we need for this example. So for the first example, I will upload my Cradle CFD files. Just want to copy that path. Upload it from here. You see that one's 250 meg, so that will take a while to upload. And while that is busy, I'm also going to create another document for an FEA. Let's not do a project. Let's just use a new document. Sorry, let me go to the folder. I see now an interesting one that it doesn't show the project that I've just created. Here it is. And so I'm just going to create another document. As I said, you can decide how you organize these different ones. And for this one, I'll be uploading a Nastran file, which is in this folder over here. So here's the PDF that I want to upload to this job. All right, so this shouldn't take too long, but this is now always a risk when doing a live demo. You never know what the internet connection is going to be like. So let me go back to the other job that I've already set up. Batch 1. See if that is complete. Okay, so those two input files have been uploaded for my Cradle analysis. And I will now simply select them and set up a new job. So I can specify a name. And in this case, it automatically detected that it's an SE flow file. And it recommends that I use 2024.1, although it has access to the newer one. I'm not sure why they're recommending the older one though, but let's leave it at that. Because it's an SE flow one, I have a selection of hardware that Hexagon has laid out that's valuable or useful for Cradle types analyses. So what we see here is the smallest system at the top. We call that atomic, then tiny, and it goes larger to largest. So at the bottom of the scale, we see a 4-core Intel Xeon, 32 gigs RAM, 300 gigabytes of storage. At the high end of the scale, we see 176 core AMD with 767 gigs of RAM and 3000 gigabytes of storage. And as you select these, the credits per hour will show. So if you run a job that will run for an hour, this one will consume 6 credits. If I run it on the largest machine, it will consume 41 credits if it runs for an hour. Now, of course, we expect a job that scales linearly to now run for a fraction of the time. So if you're lucky, the shortest or the smallest system and the largest system will cost you the same at the end of the day. The largest one will obviously, should at least be the fastest. Now, this is if it scales linearly. So that's where a bit of experimentation and understanding of the technology comes into play. Now, at this stage, it's good enough to submit the job because we've created the job, we've selected the software, we've selected the hardware, we can submit it. However, if you're interested, you can also modify the input commands. So this is what by default happens in the background when you manually submit the job or when you set up different settings. But what Hexagon has already done is to set up a few commonly used commands. Now, I don't know any of these, so I'm not going to fiddle with it. But these are totally editable as well. So if you know what this value means, in this case, the number of cores and the number of nodes, I assume, you can edit it if you need it. It becomes more obvious if you're running a Nastran job, for instance. And now it's just a matter of submitting my job. And now there's 3 things that will happen while you're having your coffee. The first thing is that these files that you've uploaded to the server must now be loaded to the actual computing solver. So this is this stage where it now shows transferring of input files, and it shows you the speed at what the transfer is happening. So this is merely done on your behalf. It's essentially copying it from this starting Nexus platform over to the compute cluster. And this may or may not take a lot of time. So this very much depends on the load of the system at that stage in terms of how long that will take. But this is just for your information, because at this point, as I say, you can go and look at other projects or do something else. But if you're interested in knowing what is happening, that's what the data transfer step is for. Sorry. Now it shows you that the remote compute instance is starting. Now, we have seen examples of this taking very long as well. Now, again, that might be dependent on the load of the system or some part of the system that still needs to be optimized. I'm not quite clear. We've seen instances where this took excessively long, or even longer than the actual analysis, but that's just something that might change over time. And then when the actual analysis will start, you will see the typical output and eventually see whether the job ran or not. Okay, so that was the job that I've now submitted for Cradle. Let's go and have a look at the other job, the Nastran job. And let's set that up. Okay, so we haven't created a job yet. So I'll select my BDF and I create the job. Again, it automatically switched to Nastran. I could also run some of the other versions, but they recommend this one. And now because of my Nastran selection, I have a different set of hardware available. I have a subatomic setup, which is only a 4-core machine with 28 gigs of RAM, or I can go all the way to a 64-core or a GPU with 96 cores. And again, this is where a chat with Gerrit comes in quite handy to understand when and under what circumstances this might actually be efficient or not. You can also see sometimes I have a label over here. In this case, this one is recommended, or one of the express ones over here. But at this stage, I'm just going to run the quick one. And because I'm a bad student, I don't listen to my lecturers. I included a space in my BDF file name. Nastran doesn't like spaces, so they warn me in this case that I cannot use a file with special characters like that. So easy fix, fortunately. I simply just go back to the input file, and I can simply rename it over here. So no need to re-upload it. I can simply just edit my mistake. All right, so I can just save the selection, and now it's happy. And as you can see, this is a default option, but there are other options as well. If you know what you're doing, you can modify the DMP settings, memory settings, etc., etc. But I'm just going to leave this as is. Let me just use the cheaper machine, which is only 5 credits, and I'm going to submit this job. And now the same process starts on this one. The files are transferred and the remote job starts. So for some reason, this one looks like it actually went very quick to input, to transfer the data file and to start the Nastran job. So now we can monitor this if we like. This is the same output as in your FO6 file. Now at this stage, while this job is running, we can actually also go and check what the input was. Again, did we use the hardware we intended? What was the Nastran command that it was submitted with? If I foresee that this job might run longer than an hour and I forgot to set that, at least I can come back and edit this alongside, and I can even see which files were submitted for the analysis. Now, other things that you can do is look at the temporary files that Nastran creates as it runs. So this is the log file. Okay, we're not going to monitor that. We can clone the job. So in other words, create a duplicate of this job and then make some changes, etc. And that's essentially the process. So very, very simple. A quick look at the CFD job, whether that's finished or not. It's still running. So if we want to see more detail, we can see what process that is making, etc. What temporary files are available, like the L file. Now, at this stage, you have to download these before you can simply view them live. But that's essentially the steps to take. Do you have any questions? Dave, you always have questions.
You remember the saying about baffling people?
About baffling people?
Brilliance and the other one. No, I don't have, I'm just, thanks. Now, I appreciate this. Gives me an idea on how to run this. I'm still, yep. I need to use it, then I'm sure I'll find the 563 bugs. Now, let me not be horrible. No, to me, it makes logical sense. The issues normally is data pre-preparation that it can read in smoothly, things like that. So, yeah, but it looks nice. I think it's a nice. I'm doing sales for you. I want discount. It's a nice, seamless way of doing batch processing analysis and things like that. So,
yeah,
exactly. It looks exciting, and it seems to ease it. I'm trying to remember the previous program we used. I think it was Insight, or whatever, that cost a fortune and 3/4. So this one only costs a fortune. But no, thank you. It was interesting.
Okay, so maybe one of the other things that I could have shown, if we just quickly do a clone of this job, is apart from the credits, sorry, I wanted to, oh yeah, this was one of the other settings that you have available for SE Flow, for instance. Instead of committing to a full job, you can also simply select a check operation. So this also submits the job for analysis, but it doesn't continue to do the full analysis. It purely just runs through the initial stages of the solver. And then if there are no errors, it will show that the model is ready for analysis. So if you expect you know, if you have an instance when you can't monitor the job for too long, but you don't want it to take, you know, run into the full analysis, for instance, you literally just want to check if you set it up correctly. You can just run the model check. That is available over here. So for any type of analysis, these settings change accordingly, which is quite convenient. So you don't need to know specifically what is best for FlowFD versus for Dytran, because the choices are already made for you. The ones that you see over here in gray means that these solvers are not yet supported, but they are coming. So at the moment, you can't submit an analysis for Adams, but they are preparing that. So it will be available in the near future.
Paul, ek het 'n vraag.
Ja, seker.
Daar staan net 'n oomblik by.
Okay, so I see this job is finished. Hopefully it means it was successful and it's now transferring the data back to the environment for me to download.
Kan ek so lank my vraag gooi? Okay, so as dit suiwer gaan oor spoed, dan kies mens die grootste hardeware en jy kry jou antwoord so vinnig as moontlik. Maar is nie noodwendig die mees koste-effektiewe keuse nie. Nou, ek weet nie of Gerrit dit dalk in sy bespreking later oor CPU's en so voort sal aanraak nie, maar gaan dit dalk in die toekoms moontlik wees om te sien what's the most cost-effective choice vir hardeware, eerder as om net suiwer die vinnigste een te hê, want ek meen as iets vir my werk, dan wil ek graag daarby hou, maar jy weet, ek wil nie onnodige geld spandeer, want alles is alles is omtrent altyd dringend, maar nie altyd nie. So
Ja.
partykeer is daar wil jy maar net goeie ware vir geld kry
Correct.
uit jou run uit.
Kijk, Gerrit, wil jy iets sê daaroor?
Chris, die goed met die beste skaal is die CFD wat excellent skaal en Diagram Rings Euler as ek dit nie mis het. Al die ander skaal nie so great met die aantal CPU cores nie. Wat wel baie useful is byvoorbeeld vir Nastran is meer memory. So ek gaan eerder een kies met baie memory as noodwendig een met baie cores. Daar's 'n paar exceptions, sekere tipe Merlin leases en goed is van dit. Wat interessant is op die CFD een is, as jy net eenvoudig werk op rand per core per uur, of euros per core per uur, is die duurste een actually die goedkoopste. Hy het 176 cores en hy vat 41 tokens per uur. Een net onder hom is, so kom ons vat daai goed, dit is 41, moet ek calculator wat kry, so 41 op 176 maal met 96. Hy moes 22 punt iets gewees het vir die tweede grootste een, om die goedkoper een. My experience met daai is, hy skaal exceptionally goed. CFD het ek al modelle gekry wat baie naby 100% skaal. So 10 keer die cores is 10 keer die spoed.
Okay.
Ek het onlangs 'n Nastran model geran wat meer memory nodig gehad het. En dan het ek een gesoek wat daai kom ons sê die decent of die eenheid, wat is dit ek soek? Kom ons sê 400 gig RAM of wat so lekker gewerk het vir daai model. So dan sal ek na daai goed begin kyk en sien wat een maak die meeste sin.
Ja.
Die Nastran goed oor die algemeen is nie crazy duur nie, want jy kan die kleinste een vat, solank hy decent hoeveelheid memory het.
Ja. Okay, ek dink nou spesifiek aan Diagram, want dis maar meeste van die goed wat ons doen.
Yes.
En hierso, ek het nog net 'n issue met die memory gehad vir goed wat ons submit nie, maar die aantal cores maak regtig groot verskil en ons het die masjien wat ons locally op solve is, het 8 performance cores en 24 wat is dit? Efficiency cores. So ek het so 'n sweet spot gekry wat betref die SMP en DMP en dit het baie goed gewerk, behalwe dat nou lately bom my uit en dan sê nee, maar ek mag nie DMP gebruik nie. Ek en Benjo het al daaroor gepraat. Maar wat ek nie lekker kan verstaan nie by Diagram spesifiek nou is, as jy nou, kom ons sê jy het nou jou konfigurasie gekies, jy kan sommer enigiets kies daarso. Ek moet net by die volgende menu uitkom. Daar is, okay, op die command, as jy op die command klik, dan is daar opsies vir DMP. DMP yes vir CPU's en 2 CPU's. Wat sal die verskil wees tussen die twee? Wat doen die ander 2 CPU's dan? Vervul hulle soos 'n SMP rol dan, of wat presies doen hulle dan?
Ek is nou nie seker nie, ek sal command line moet gaan kyk. So ek weet van die goed soos maak en Nastran almal kan jy DMP en SMP en jy kan hulle meng. So selfs in die CFD.
So ja, so die ek het 'n meeting gehad met Nexus ouens, eintlik een van die wat sy Prafula, en toe het hulle vir my gesê ja, as ek SMP wil gebruik dan moet ek net sê DMP both, nie yes nie switch, en dan die aantal cores wat jy wil, maar ek verstaan nog steeds nie wat die invloed daarvan is nie, en want nêrens word SMP gemention nie, so die vraag wat ek dan het is, jy weet, as jy niks sê nie, gebruik jy dan die ander cores SMP of wat doen hulle?
Om eerlik te wees, daai het niks met Nexus uit te waai. So kom ons vat dit offline.
Dis 'n Diagram setting.
Ja, ons kan die Diagram setting separately werk om te kyk wat dit beteken. Ek weet wat Nastran is en ek het 'n idee wat maak is.
Ja.
Ek is nie seker wat Diagram se command line settings is nie.
Okay, nee, is reg.
Ja, so hierdie settings is jou solver is wat jy Solver verwag, nie wat Nexus verwag nie. So as jy by Nastran is, dan sien jy die tipiese goed wat in jou config file is, wat jy dan sommer in jou command line insit.
Ja, okay, dis reg.
Doc, enige vrae van jou kant af?
Ja, skus, ek is besig om te speel. Ek het agtergekom ek het 'n trial wat active was nou vir 'n week, so ek het net 2 weke oor om te werk.
Okay, so wat ek vir julle kan wys is as jy nou wil weet hoeveel credits jy oor het. As jy op jou compute landing pages is hier so 'n blokkie wat wys compute credits. En dis dan waar jy kan ingaan en dan kan gaan kyk hoeveel krediete het jy al opgebruik, watse jobs het al gerun en dis meer. So ek net hier oopmaak. So ons het 2000 credits gehad, ons het al 500 gebruik, ons kan 'n idee kry van wanneer dit gebruik is, ons kan sien wie is die ouens wat al die tokens opgebruik, so kan ek met hierdie ou gaan gesels. Daai is dan net enige transaksies soos wat jy tokens aankoop byvoorbeeld en dan die jobs wat tokens gebruik het. So jy kan hier dan net gaan sien, okay, hier was 'n redelike groot job. Hy het soveel tokens gebruik en dis meer. En dan as jy nog lede wil bysit in jou maatskappy, dan kan jy hulle hier gaan add. So as daar nog iemand is, dan hoef hulle nou nie deur die hele onboarding proses te gaan nie. Jy invite hulle letterlik hierso met 'n e-mailadres en jy gee vir hulle toegang tot Nexus Compute, wat ek nou snaaks nog nie hier sien nie. So ek nou nie seker wat ek mens dan hier kies nie en dan ja, ek sê jy nou verwag Nexus Compute moes nou hier lys gewees het. So ons sal net daarna moet kyk. Maar dan kry jy outomaties jou lys van mense hierso by. Dis maar al wat ek nog verder wou uitgewys het. Okay, dan dink ek is dit. As daar nie nog enige vrae is nie, dan ja, gebruik hierdie tyd, gebruik julle credits terwyl julle dit nog het, want dit verval soos julle gesien het. Ek dink dit is dalk ook belangrik om uit te wys op die Nexus terms and conditions. So jou trial is dan nou net geldig vir die maand. Dit gaan julle niks kos nie en dan as julle besluit om wel credits te kry, gaan dit deur soos 'n gewone aankoopproses loop. Julle gaan ons kontak, ons gaan deur julle normale proses wees. En daai krediete bly dan net valid vir daai jaar. So dis nogal belangrik om al vooruit te skat hoeveel tokens, krediete jy gaan nodig hê vir die jaar. En terwyl daar op hierdie stadium geen koste is vir die transfer en storage cost vir data nie vir die eerste jaar. Ek weet nie of hulle al enigstens pryse het vir wat dit sal kos later aan nie. Dis seker maar iets wat mens met tyd sal by uitkom. Goed, as daar niks verder is nie, dan het julle 'n lekker dag hê.
Baie dankie vir jou tyd.
Okay.
Almal.